A 17-year-old girl was handed over to a mafia boss as debt payment. But what he did shocked everyone. Her family thought she was worthless, infertile, disposable. He was supposed to auction her off, collect his payment, execute the deal. But when Viktor Volkov discovered her secret medical records, everything changed. Instead of discarding her like damaged goods, he did something no one in the criminal underworld expected. He claimed her, not as a bride, not as property, but as something unprecedented. She was supposed to be a transaction. He was supposed to be a monster. But together, they would become something far more dangerous. Watch as a broken girl becomes a criminal queen, and a ruthless enforcer discovers that the most lethal weapon isn't a gun. It's love. Betrayed by her own family, protected by a man everyone fears. Aria Castellano is about to prove that being worthless was just the beginning of her power. When survival becomes revolution, who really owns whom? Coming soon, not for the faint of heart. The night pressed against her bedroom window like a suffocating black shroud. 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes until her 18th birthday. 15 minutes until everything would change. Aria's fingers trembled as she clutched the medical folder hidden against her chest, the white paper crisp and sterile, just like the doctor's voice when he delivered her diagnosis 1 year ago. MRKH syndrome, infertile, broken. In the Mafia world, those words were a death sentence. Downstairs, her father's voice rose and fell in heated conversation. Lorenzo Castellano wasn't a man who spoke. He growled, negotiated, threatened. Tonight, something felt different. Electric. Dangerous. She adjusted her midnight blue dress, the silk whispering against her skin. The fabric was expensive, chosen with deliberate care. Like preparing for a funeral or a sacrifice. The family dining room buzzed with tension. Her mother, Elena, nervously rearranged crystal glasses. Her younger sister, Sofia, watched with wide, frightened eyes, and her father, Lorenzo, paced like a caged wolf, checking his expensive watch every few minutes. "Sit down, Aria," her mother hissed. "Don't draw attention." But Aria had spent a year drawing as little attention as possible. A year hiding her medical records. A year knowing that in their world, a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear sons, and she was worthless. Midnight approached. 3 black SUVs rolled silently into the circular driveway, their engines a low, predatory rumble. Headlights cut through the darkness like surgical blades. Lorenzo's hand clamped on her shoulder. "Smile," he whispered. Not a suggestion, a command. Heavy footsteps echoed through the marble entryway. Boots that didn't belong to any Castellano family member. Foreign. Dangerous. A man's voice, Russian, cold as Siberian winter, spoke something Aria couldn't quite catch. Her father's response was immediate, desperate. "Take her. She's perfect, unmarked, untouched." The words landed like physical blows. Aria felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't a business meeting. This was a transaction. She was the transaction. The door opened. A massive silhouette filled the frame. 6'4" of pure, lethal muscle. Scars visible even in the dim light. Eyes that looked like they'd seen hell and decided to bring some of it back. Viktor Volkov. Bratva enforcer. The ghost. He wasn't what she expected. Not some cartoon villain. This was a predator. Controlled. Calculating. Every movement precise like a weapon calibrated for maximum damage. His gaze swept the room, then locked onto her. One look. One moment. And Aria knew her life was about to fundamentally change. Lorenzo pushed her forward. "She's clean, healthy, exactly as promised." Viktor said nothing, just watched, evaluated, like she was merchandise, which Aria realized with a sudden bitter clarity was exactly what she was. Her father's gambling debts, her own perceived worthlessness, the brutal mathematics of the criminal underworld, it all converged in this moment. Aria lifted her chin. If she was going to be traded like chattel, she would do it with dignity, with fire in her eyes. Viktor's mouth, hard, scarred, twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. "We have a deal," he said finally. His voice was like gravel, Russian accented, emotionless. Lorenzo nodded, suddenly unable to meet anyone's eyes. And just like that, Aria Castellano ceased being a Castellano. She became a possession, a debt paid, a transaction completed. Midnight struck. Her 18th birthday arrived with the sound of a closing car door and the smell of expensive leather and barely contained violence. Her new life began. The door swung open with a silent, well-oiled precision that spoke of expensive engineering and carefully maintained control. Viktor Volkov filled the doorway like a nightmare made flesh, 6 feet 4 inches of muscle wrapped in a charcoal Brioni suit that cost more than most men's annual salary. Scars traced his face and hands like roadmaps of violence, telling stories of battles survived and enemies destroyed. The room fell silent. Armed men who moments before had been drinking and boasting now instinctively stepped back, creating a path for the Bratva enforcer known as the Ghost. Lorenzo Castellano's bravado wilted under that predatory gaze, his fingers trembling slightly as he gripped his whiskey glass. "Signor Volkov," Lorenzo said, his voice a thin attempt at casual, "I'm prepared to settle my debt." Victor said nothing. He moved like a panther, controlled, deadly, every step calculated. His eyes, the color of steel and just as cold, swept the room before landing on Aria. She stood perfectly still, back straight, chin lifted in a defiance that masked her terror. She was beautiful in the way Italian Mafia princesses were always beautiful. Dark hair, olive skin, delicate features that looked like they'd been sculpted by an artist who understood both fragility and strength. But there was something different in her eyes. Not just fear, something harder, something watching. Victor approached, his movements making everyone else in the room seem suddenly awkward and small. He circled Aria like she was livestock at auction, which, in this moment, she essentially was. His scarred hand reached out, fingers rough against her jaw as he tilted her face, checking her teeth, her skin, her bone structure. Aria didn't flinch, their eyes locked, her dark brown against his steel gray. In that moment, something passed between them. A recognition, a challenge. Lorenzo cleared his throat. "She's pure, 18 and untouched. Medical records confirm." Victor's hand clenched. Aria noticed how his fingers tensed, how a muscle jumped in his jaw. For just a millisecond, something like disgust flickered in his eyes. Not at her. At the transaction happening around her. "Documentation," Victor said. Not a request. A demand. Lorenzo scrambled, pulling out a manila folder. Birth certificate, medical records, family lineage, everything to prove her value. Victor's eyes scanned the documents. Something changed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. His fingers, those dangerous, scarred hands, went very still on the paper. "You think me a fool, Castellano." The words came out soft, deadly. Lorenzo's confidence crumbled. What do you mean?" Victor's thumb traced something on the medical record. His expression gave away nothing, but Aria saw it. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a subtle tension in his shoulders. He knew her secret. Somehow, impossibly, he knew about her condition. The MRKH syndrome that made her worthless in this world of strategic marriages and bloodline preservation. The medical reality that meant she could never bear children. The truth her own family had been preparing to hide, to lie about, to somehow circumvent in this transaction. Victor looked up, met her eyes, and for the first time, Aria saw something in a man's gaze that wasn't calculation, wasn't transaction, wasn't seeing her as a problem to be solved or an asset to be traded. He saw her. The moment stretched, electric with unspoken understanding. Lorenzo shifted uncomfortably, sensing something had changed but not understanding what. Victor's next words would alter everything. "I'll take her," he said simply. "Not as payment, as mine." In that moment, Aria's life and the entire criminal underworld would never be the same. The medical records slammed against the wooden table like a death sentence. Crisp white paper, sterile medical language, brutal truth exposed under harsh fluorescent lights. MRKH syndrome, infertility, worthless. Victor Volkov's scarred hands spread the documents, his eyes burning holes through Lorenzo Castellano's desperate facade. The room felt thick with tension, the kind that precedes explosion. Arya stood frozen, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. So, Victor's voice was quiet. Too quiet. You attempt to pass me damaged goods? Lorenzo's face went pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead, creating tiny rivers of panic. Victor, I can explain. Explain what? The Russian's voice cut like razor wire. That you tried to offload your daughter knowing she cannot produce an heir? That you thought I would not discover her condition? Arya wanted to disappear, to melt into the ornate wallpaper and become invisible. Her secret, the medical diagnosis she'd hidden for years, now lay exposed like a raw, bleeding wound. Every Mafia daughter knew her value was measured in her ability to continue the family line, and she had failed, spectacularly. I have other daughters, Lorenzo stammered. Beautiful, fertile girls who… Victor's laugh was pure Arctic ice. You think I want your broodmares? That I'm some simple transaction? The room dropped 10 degrees. Arya watched as Victor's massive frame seemed to grow, filling the space with barely contained violence. She knew his reputation. The Ghost, they called him, not just for how silently he killed, but for how he seemed to materialize from nowhere, leaving only death in his wake. Her father was sweating now, real fear replacing his initial confidence. Please… Shut up. 2 words, spoken so softly they seemed almost gentle, but in that gentleness lived pure menace. Victor turned and Arya felt the weight of his gaze. Not lustful, not predatory, something else entirely, something she couldn't name. Pack 1 bag, he told her, not a request, a command. Lorenzo started to protest. Victor's hand moved so fast Arya barely saw it. Suddenly a knife was pressed against her father's throat. Not a word. The sounds that followed were something Arya would never forget. Muffled thuds, wet sounds, her father's strangled whimpers, but she did exactly as instructed. 1 bag. Practical. Essentials. When she returned, Victor was wiping blood from his hands with a white handkerchief, looking as calm as if he'd merely finished afternoon tea. Her father was elsewhere. She didn't want to know where. You're coming with me, Victor stated. Not a question. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. His eyes, steel gray and impossibly cold, met hers. Because you cannot be bred like cattle, which means you are the only woman in this world who might be kept for something other than her womb. In that moment, Arya understood something fundamental had changed. She wasn't just being traded, she was being claimed, and the world of the Bratva would never be the same. Outside, Moscow's winter winds howled. Inside, a new order was being written in blood and unexpected mercy. Her life, she realized, was about to begin. The Rolls-Royce glided through midnight streets, her family home shrinking in the rearview mirror like a fading nightmare. Arya's fingers traced the leather seat, expensive and cold, just like the man driving. Victor. Volkov's bloody knuckles gripped the steering wheel, each muscle coiled with restrained violence. She'd said nothing since being handed over. No tears, no begging. Just silent observation, her dark eyes taking in every detail of her new reality. The city blurred past, streetlights casting intermittent shadows across his scarred face. He looked like a man who'd fought wars and won, and lost something fundamental in the process. The penthouse wasn't just luxurious, it was a fortress. Marble floors gleamed under strategic lighting, windows reinforced behind elegant curtains. Security cameras tracked their movement, tiny black eyes recording every step. Only the bathroom promised privacy, a small mercy she didn't understand yet. Victor spoke without looking at her. Your room. Stay inside. Everything you need is here. The bedroom was larger than her entire childhood bedroom. Designer clothes hung precisely arranged, her exact size, tags still attached. Shoes lined up like soldiers. A walk-in closet that suggested she wasn't just a prisoner, but a carefully curated possession. The door locked from the outside, a gilded cage. Why me? The question escaped before she could stop herself. I'm worthless. Everyone knows that. Victor paused. For the first time, something flickered in his steel gray eyes. not softness, something harder to define. Not everyone is valued only for what they can produce. His cryptic response hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Night settled, and Arya watched through floor-to-ceiling windows. The courtyard below became Victor's stage. Men arrived. Conversations happened in rapid Russian. One man, expensive suit, nervous energy, seemed to be negotiating something. At sunrise, negotiations ended, brutally. Victor pulled a knife so quickly, Arya barely saw movement. One moment, the suited man stood talking. The next, he was on his knees, blood painting the pristine white stones. No hesitation, no emotion, just clinical execution. She should have been terrified. Instead, something else churned inside her. Recognition. Understanding that in this world, mercy was a luxury neither of them could afford. When Victor looked up, their eyes met. He didn't try to hide what he'd done. Didn't apologize. Didn't explain. Just watched her, waiting to see her reaction. Arya didn't flinch. The first rule of survival she'd learned in her Mafia family: never show weakness. The second rule: adapt or die. Her medical condition, Mark-H syndrome, had taught her adaptation was an art form. Being deemed worthless meant learning to create your own value, and right now, her value was staying alive, understanding her new world, finding her place in it. Victor walked inside, blood still speckling his hands. He didn't wash immediately. Another message. Another test. "Breakfast will be served at 7, he said. Not a request. A statement. Arya realized several things simultaneously. She was completely isolated, completely dependent, and completely intrigued by the man who'd chosen her when everyone else considered her disposable. Something told her this was going to be far more complicated than a simple transaction, far more dangerous than a typical mafia arrangement. Her survival instincts, honed by years of hiding her medical secret, of navigating her family's brutal world, were humming. Not with fear, with something closer to anticipation. The game had changed, and she was going to play it perfectly. The morning sunlight sliced through the heavy velvet curtains, casting sharp lines across Arya's face. She stirred, her muscles aching from the previous day's trauma, the unfamiliar silk sheet sliding against her skin. Before she could fully open her eyes, she sensed a presence, heavy, still, watching. Victor sat in a high-backed leather chair positioned precisely at her bedside, his massive frame somehow perfectly motionless. Dark eyes tracked her every movement, predatory and intense. He was dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit, looking like he'd already dispatched several business matters before she'd even awakened. "Good morning," he said, his Russian accent thick and controlled. Not a question, not soft, a statement. Arya pulled the sheets higher, suddenly hyper-aware of her vulnerability. "How long have you been sitting there?" A ghost of a smile, more threat than humor, crossed his scarred face. "Since dawn." The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, modern and cold. Victor began explaining her new reality with clinical precision. She would assist with his legitimate business accounts, review financial documents, and prove her worth beyond being a mere transaction. His tone made it clear. This wasn't a request. "You understand," he said, sliding a laptop toward her, "that you are now under my protection, but protection requires contribution." The financial records were complex: international money transfers, shell corporations, intricate accounting that required both mathematical skill and strategic thinking. Arya realized quickly this wasn't simple bookkeeping. Victor was systematically dismantling entire criminal infrastructures, redirecting funds, creating legal barriers that would choke out existing trafficking networks. When his encrypted phone rang, Arya watched, transfixed, as Victor's entire demeanor transformed. His voice became ice, cold, precise, ruthless. "Liberate the girls. Execute anyone who resists. No survivors among the traffickers." The conversation was brief, clinical. The kind of order that would mean multiple deaths, delivered with the emotional investment of ordering takeout. Later that evening, something inside Arya, a mixture of desperation and defiance, drove her to attempt escape. The service elevator seemed her best option. She'd memorized the floor layout during Victor's earlier tour, calculating her chances. Her bare feet moved silently across the marble floors. One hand on the elevator call button, heart racing. The elevator doors opened. Victor stood there, covered in blood, not splattered, not accidentally marked, completely, deliberately soaked. His white dress shirt was more red than white, dark rivulets trailing down his hands. His eyes met hers, not surprised, not angry, calculating. Running? The single word held more threat than 1,000 screams. But instead of punishment, something unexpected happened. Victor cleaned up, changed, and took her with him. They drove in silence to a nondescript warehouse on the city's industrial edge. What happened next would forever change Arya's understanding of the world, and of Victor. Inside the warehouse, young women huddled, terrified, traumatized, but alive. Victor moved through the space with surgical precision, issuing orders to his team: medical personnel, counselors, legal advocates. Every girl gets medical examination, full psychological support, new identities, placement in safe houses, he instructed, his voice carrying both authority and unexpected gentleness. Arya watched, understanding now why he'd kept her, why he'd claimed her. This wasn't about ownership, this was about protection. As dawn broke, they returned to the penthouse. Victor turned to her, those dangerous eyes holding something she'd never expected to see, a glimmer of something almost human. "Now you understand," he said quietly, "what you're being protected from. The monsters in this world weren't just men like Victor. The real monsters were the ones who saw human beings as disposable commodities, and he was dismantling them, one network at a time." Arya realized with a mixture of terror and unexpected hope that her life would never be the same. Here's the chapter script for Chapter 6 of Blood Debt. The ledgers blurred before Arya's eyes, columns of numbers dancing with potential secrets. Victor's accounting system was meticulous, nothing like the chaotic records her father maintained. Each spreadsheet told a story of calculated precision, legitimate businesses intertwined with carefully masked criminal enterprises. A name caught her attention: Marco Ricci. She'd heard that name whispered in hushed tones during her father's late-night meetings. Her finger traced the column, heart racing as she realized this wasn't just another routine financial record. Marco was feeding information, detailed, specific information, to someone named Dmitri, Victor's uncle. The implications crashed over her like ice water. Someone inside Victor's organization was leaking critical intelligence, and she was the only one who knew. Her first instinct was survival. Stay quiet. Don't get involved. But something had shifted in her during these past days of captivity. The timid Mafia princess was transforming, learning that silence could be as deadly as any weapon. Across town, in a soundproofed conference room, Victor listened to his lieutenant's reports with dangerous stillness. Alexi's voice was low, measured. "We've detected inconsistencies in our weapon shipment routes. Someone knows our movements before we make them." A muscle twitched in Victor's jaw. His reputation as the Ghost wasn't just about killing silently. It was about controlling every variable, anticipating every threat. A leak meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death in their world. By evening, tension hummed through the penthouse like an electrical current. Arya moved with calculated grace during dinner, her movements deliberate. The new server, tall, muscular, hands too still for someone supposed to be carrying plates, triggered every instinct she'd learned growing up in a Mafia household. She watched him. Watched how his eyes constantly swept the room. Watched how his right hand never strayed far from his waist, where a weapon would be concealed. One moment of decision could change everything. The wine glass tilted, accidentally, in her hand. Red liquid splashed across Victor's immaculate white shirt, forcing him to move. The window behind his chair exploded inward. Time compressed. Victor moved with inhuman speed, body covering Arya's, weapon already drawn. The assassin, the server, was moving too, but Victor was faster. 2 precise shots rang out and the man crumpled. Silence descended. broken only by Victor's controlled breathing. His eyes locked onto Arya. "Explain." She met his gaze without flinching. "I recognized him. From my father's compound. He wasn't a server. He was a killer." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Not softness, he didn't do soft, but a grudging respect. A recognition that she was more than just a captive, more than just a potential victim. "You could have let me die," he whispered, "and been free." Arya's response was immediate. Freedom means nothing if it comes from betrayal. For the first time, Victor looked at her and saw not a mafia princess, not a potential liability, but a potential ally. Someone who understood the brutal calculus of their world. Someone who chose loyalty even when escape was possible. The bodies would be cleaned, the window replaced, but something fundamental had changed in that moment. Arya Castellano was no longer just a captive. She was becoming dangerous, and Victor Volkov was starting to realize that might be exactly what he needed. The moonlight carved silver lines across Victor's scarred knuckles as he stood in the doorway of Arya's bedroom. 2 a.m. The silence hummed with the aftermath of the assassination attempt, each shadow holding potential danger. She hadn't heard him enter. Her back was turned, carefully wrapping a makeshift bandage around a cut on her forearm, a slice from the flying glass during the attack. Her movements were precise, clinical. No trembling, no fear. "You should let me do that," he said quietly. Arya didn't startle, didn't jump, just looked over her shoulder, dark eyes reflecting something between defiance and exhaustion. "I've been taking care of my own wounds for years." He stepped closer and she didn't move. Away. A first. His fingers were rough when he took her arm, examining the cut. Clean slice, superficial. But something about her calm unnerved him more than any screaming victim ever had. "My sister used to patch herself up like this," he said unexpectedly. The words hung between them, a rare vulnerability from a man known as the Ghost in Bratva circles. Arya said nothing, just watched him, waiting. "Her name was Natasha," Victor continued, something brittle in his voice. "The Italians, traffickers, they found her when she was 17, just like you." His thumb traced the edge of her bandage. "She was beautiful, smart. They broke her before they killed her." The confession landed like a stone in still water. Arya understood then that this was more than just another story. This was the genesis of Victor's rage, the reason he'd been systematically destroying trafficking networks across 3 countries. "Is that why you saved those girls?" she asked softly. "The ones in the warehouse?" Victor's eyes met hers. No lies lived between them in that moment. "Because I couldn't save her." Something shifted. The space between predator and prey dissolved. They were just 2 broken people, recognizing each other's scars. "My family," Arya said suddenly. "They saw my medical condition as a death sentence. Infertile, worthless." Her voice didn't break, no self-pity, just fact. In their world, a woman's value is her ability to breed strategic alliances. Victor's laugh was sharp, unexpected. "We are quite the pair, the monster, the broken girl." "You're not a monster," Arya said. And she meant it. For the first time, Victor looked truly shocked. No one had ever said those words to him, not after everything he'd done, everything he'd become. "You're the first person in 5 years who looked at my scars and didn't look away," he murmured. "The first person who isn't afraid of the monster, because you see yourself as broken too." Dawn's first light was creeping through the windows when Victor finally spoke again. "This penthouse isn't safe anymore. Pack everything. We're leaving for my estate at first light." Something dangerous glimmered in his eyes. A promise. A threat. "Isolation changes everything," he warned her. Arya held his gaze. No fear, just understanding. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The monster, and the girl he'd claimed. The armored SUV's engine cut off, jolting Arya from her fitful sleep. Her neck ached from the awkward position against the leather seat. The world outside the tinted windows blurred with early morning mist. Mountains rose like silent sentinels, dense pine forests swallowing the road behind them. Victor's hand touched her shoulder, firm, businesslike. "We're here." The compound wasn't a house. It was a fortress. Gray stone walls rose 3 stories high, reinforced windows positioned like strategic military outposts. Armed guards patrolled walkways, their movements precise and calculated. No one would call this a home. This was a stronghold. Arya stepped out, her designer boots sinking slightly into gravel. The mountain air was crisp, thin, nothing like the city's suffocating atmosphere. Here, everything felt different, controlled, dangerous. Victor moved with predatory grace, retrieving her single bag. She hadn't been allowed much when leaving her old life behind, just essentials. Everything else, her past, her family, her entire identity, had been stripped away in one brutal transaction. "Follow me," he commanded, not looking back. The interior shocked her. Marble floors gleamed beneath Persian rugs. Artwork worth millions decorated walls, original Russian masters alongside contemporary pieces. It was a museum disguised as a home, every surface curated, every detail intentional. Her assigned wing was bigger than her entire family's apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked dense forest and distant mountain peaks. No locks on the doors, but the implied threat was clear. Where would she even run? A fully equipped gym occupied one section of her wing. Weights, training mats, weapons mounted like artwork. A medical facility gleamed with stainless steel equipment. A library filled another room, books in Russian, English, Italian, covering topics from international finance to advanced combat strategies. "You'll train," Victor said matter-of-factly during their first evening together. "If you're going to be near me, you need to protect yourself." The training mat felt hard beneath her feet. Victor moved like liquid steel, demonstrating a complex takedown technique. When he grabbed her wrist to demonstrate positioning, electricity sparked between them. His touch was clinical, professional, but she felt something deeper. "Watch my hands," he instructed. "Your first defense is always awareness." Their bodies pressed together as he demonstrated each move. She could feel the solid muscle beneath his black training shirt, smell the faint trace of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, something dangerous. He showed her how to break a wrist grip, how to redirect momentum, how to create distance from an attacker. Every technique was precise, calculated. Nothing was left to chance. When he demonstrated a close-quarters defensive move, their faces were inches apart. His eyes, gray as mountain stone, locked onto hers. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Desire, danger, a connection neither expected. Victor pulled back abruptly, breaking contact. Enough for today. That night, Arya lay awake, replaying the training session. 1 week since her collection. 1 week since her entire world transformed. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't just a captive. Something was changing. In her, in Victor, in the very air around them. Outside her window, mountain shadows lengthened. Guards moved silently along the perimeter. She was safe. She was trapped. She was becoming something entirely new. Tomorrow would bring another lesson. Another chance to survive. Another opportunity to understand the dangerous man who now controlled her entire existence. The gym smelled like iron and sweat, the rhythmic thud of Victor's fists against the heavy bag cutting through the pre-dawn silence. Arya stood in the doorway, watching muscles ripple across his scarred back. Each punch seemed to carry years of rage, of pain, of something deeper than mere violence. She'd learned to move quietly over the past week. Victor trained her that way. Silent steps, controlled breath, always aware. Her body ached from yesterday's combat lesson, muscles she didn't know existed now screaming in protest. But she wouldn't show weakness, not to him. "You gonna stand there all morning or join me?" His voice didn't break rhythm, fists still hammering the leather bag. Arya stepped forward, grabbing her own set of wrapped hand wraps. Her fingers moved mechanically, remembering the precise technique he'd taught her days earlier. Wrap tight, protect the knuckles, create a shield. "Your left side is still vulnerable," Victor muttered, not looking directly at her. He demonstrated a block, his massive hand intercepting an imaginary strike. "Always protect your core. In this world, exposure means death." The lesson wasn't just about physical combat. She understood that now. Every movement, every instruction carried a deeper message about survival. They sparred, Victor's movements deliberate and controlled. He could crush her with a single blow, but instead he guided her, correcting her stance, showing her how to use momentum against a larger opponent. Her smaller frame could be a weapon, not a weakness. When she successfully pinned him, a move that took days of practice, something electric passed between them, their faces inches apart, breath mingling. For a moment, the world narrowed to just them. His eyes, usually cold, flickered with something dangerous and intense. Then he was gone, breaking contact faster than she could process. Later that afternoon, while helping organize financial documents, another skill Victor was teaching her, she discovered something unexpected. Medical clinic transfer records, significant amounts of money flowing to women's health centers across Russia, anonymous donations, meticulously hidden. "You fund medical care for trafficking victims," she said that evening. Not a question, but a statement. Victor froze, a glass of vodka halfway to his lips. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "My sister," he said finally. "She wasn't the only one, but she was the first I couldn't save." The story spilled out slowly. His sister, brutalized and broken, ultimately killed by the very men who should have protected her. Victor had been the one to end her suffering, a mercy killing that haunted him, a wound that never truly healed. "I won't let another woman suffer," he said quietly, "not if I can prevent it." That night she found him in his study, drunk, vulnerable, the monster with blood on his hands revealing something human underneath. "You're 18, he mumbled, "and my captive. I'm already a monster. I won't be that kind of monster." Then he passed out, leaving Arya to wonder about the man behind the violence, the protector hiding beneath the predator, the wounded soul who was learning, slowly, what redemption might look like. She draped a blanket over him, her fingers briefly touching his scarred hand, not with fear, but with something closer to understanding. Outside, Moscow stirred. Another day in the dangerous dance between survival and transformation was about to begin. The morning light filtered through heavy silk curtains, casting a soft glow on Victor's muscular form, sprawled across the leather chaise. His head was a mess of dark hair, a half-empty vodka bottle on the side table, testament to the previous night's emotional breakdown. Arya moved quietly, her bare feet making no sound on the marble floor. She'd seen Victor brutal, seen him violent. But last night she'd seen something else entirely, the man beneath the monster. His confession about his sister had cracked something open between them, a vulnerability he'd never intended to reveal. Carefully, she prepared a traditional Russian hangover remedy, a mixture of pickled herring, black bread, and strong coffee. Her hands moved with a precision she'd learned watching her father's associates, a skill she'd never thought would serve her in Victor's world. When she set the tray down, Victor's eyes snapped open, cold, dangerous, before softening with recognition. "You're still here," he muttered in Russian. "Where else would I go?" Arya responded, switching effortlessly to his language. Her pronunciation was rough, but the words were clear. A grunt was his only response as he sat up, muscles rippling. The scars that mapped his body told stories of violence, each one a testament to battles survived, enemies destroyed. But today, they seemed less like weapons and more like memories. Over the next few days, Arya began to push boundaries. When Victor berated a kitchen staff member for a minor mistake, she intervened. "He's been working double shifts," she said coolly. "Punishing him for exhaustion is counterproductive." Victor had stared at her, something like surprise flickering in his eyes. By the time Alexei arrived with news from Dmitri, Arya had already begun restructuring parts of the money laundering operation. Spreadsheets covered her workspace, complex financial models that would save the organization millions. "Dmitri is asking questions," Alexei reported, his voice low. "He wants to know why you're keeping a woman who can't produce heirs, a woman who contributes nothing." Arya pretended not to listen, but every word burned. She knew exactly what she was: a burden, a problem, someone deemed worthless by both her birth family and her new world. That evening, she approached Victor with a file. "I found a gap in the Cyprus Shell Company network," she said, spreading documents across his desk. "By restructuring these offshore accounts, we can reduce tax exposure by 22% and create 3 additional clean money channels." Victor's eyes narrowed, scanning the documents. Minutes passed in complete silence. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A real laugh, not a cold bark, but genuine amusement. "My father would have killed to have someone like you," he said, something soft entering his voice. Later that night, Russian language lessons became something else entirely. Victor's body pressed close as he corrected her pronunciation, his breath warm against her ear. When she deliberately mispronounced a curse word, turning a serious phrase into something absurdly ridiculous, Victor's laughter shook them both. "You're dangerous," he whispered. Not as a threat, but as a revelation. Arya met his gaze, no longer the terrified girl handed over as payment. "I learned from the best." The tension between them was electric, not just sexual, but something deeper. A recognition, 2 broken people discovering they might be whole together. Outside, the city moved. Bratva soldiers waited. Enemies plotted. But in this moment, there was only Victor. Only Arya. Only the dangerous, delicate dance of 2 souls finding each other in the darkness. The silence of the estate pressed against her skin like a physical weight. 2 weeks of isolation, and Arya had learned every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in Victor's massive bedroom. She stretched, feeling the silk sheets slide against her skin, remembering the moment Victor had left before dawn for the mandatory Bratva gathering. Heavy guards patrolled outside. Inside, she was both prisoner and something more complicated, something deeper. She caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. Gone was the trembling Mafia princess. In her place stood a woman learning to inhabit her own power. Victor's training had transformed her, combat moves etched into muscle memory, strategic thinking sharpening with each conversation. Her phone buzzed. A message from Victor. "Behave!" She almost laughed. Behave was no longer in her vocabulary. The guards changed shifts at precisely 2:47 a.m. She heard Victor's footsteps before she saw him, heavy, deliberate, carrying the weight of violence. When he entered, blood dried on his knuckles, she didn't flinch. "Rough meeting?" she asked. Victor's eyes, steel gray and impossibly intense, scanned her. "Interrogation. A traitor in the lower ranks." Most women would have recoiled. Arya simply grabbed the first aid kit and gestured for him to sit. Her hands, now steady and practiced, cleaned his split knuckles. "Tell me." He watched her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. "The council questioned why I'm keeping you. A woman who can't bear children. Worthless, they said." Her hands paused, not in shame, in challenge. "And what did you tell them?" A ghost of a smile. "That you're more valuable than their entire bloodline." Later, that evening, Alexei arrived. Urgent, tense. The Bratva gathering tomorrow demanded Victor bring his woman, a show of power, of possession. Traditional rules that allowed no exceptions. Victor's initial response was immediate. "No." Arya stepped forward. "I'm going." The look he gave her, part warning, part something deeper. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "You'll see me as the monster," he said softly. "The version of me they know, not the man you've seen here." Her response was swift. "I know exactly who you are, all of you." When he finally agreed, something shifted between them. Not just captor and captive, not just a transaction, something electric, dangerous, alive. Tomorrow, she would step into the Bratva's inner circle, not as a victim, not as a prize, as a weapon. Victor watched her, reading her thoughts. "One wrong move," he warned, "and they'll tear you apart." Arya's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let them try." The night settled around them. 2 predators, preparing for war. Her infertility, once a sentence of worthlessness, now felt like a shield. They couldn't use her for breeding. They would have to see her for her mind, her strategy, her ruthlessness. Victor had taught her well. Too well, perhaps. As midnight approached, she could feel the anticipation humming through her veins. The Bratva gathering wasn't just an event, it was a battlefield, and she was done being a passive participant in her own story. Her fingers traced the edge of a knife Victor had gifted her, hidden, of course. Always have a backup plan. She was ready. The silk of her blood-red gown whispered against marble floors as Arya descended the stairs. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. She knew she looked like a Mafia queen. Victor had chosen this dress specifically to make a statement. But underneath the designer fabric, her heart raced like a cornered animal. This Bratva gathering was a battlefield, and she was walking into enemy territory. The compound's main hall glittered with crystal chandeliers and cold, appraising eyes. Old men in expensive suits watched her, their gazes sharp and predatory. They saw a young woman. They didn't see the weapon Victor had been carefully crafting. Well, well, a gravelly voice called from her left. Nikolai, one of Dmitri's senior lieutenants, stepped forward. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The infertile princess arrives. Arya didn't flinch. Gentlemen, she said smoothly, I heard there's a persistent problem with your money laundering channels. Want me to take a look? Silence dropped like a blade. She pulled out a slim tablet, her fingers dancing across the screen. Within minutes, she'd identified 3 critical vulnerabilities in their financial network, weak points that had been bleeding millions. The room grew very quiet. How did you... Nikolai started. Years of watching my father, Arya interrupted. Sometimes being underestimated is its own advantage. Victor watched from across the room, a predator in an impeccable black suit. His eyes never left her, tracking her movements like she was the most dangerous thing in the room. And in that moment, she was. The evening progressed. Whispers followed her. Calculations happened behind fake smiles. But Arya held her ground, a steel spine beneath her delicate exterior. Then everything changed. 3 men, broad-shouldered, clearly drunk on vodka and power, cornered her in a side hallway. Away from witnesses, away from Victor. Little girl, the tallest one sneered. You think you belong here? Arya remembered Victor's training. Breathe, assess, strike only when necessary. The first man lunged. She sidestepped, using his momentum against him. A sharp elbow to his kidney, a precise kick that sent him stumbling, but they were bigger, stronger, and there were 3 of them. Just as the second man grabbed her arm, a sound like thunder crashed through the hallway. Victor. His entrance was apocalyptic. Pure, controlled violence made flesh. The first man died before he could scream, a precise knife strike that dropped him instantly. The second man's death was slower, more deliberate. A message. She is mine, Victor growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Touch her and I'll make your death last for days. The third man tried to run. Victor caught him by the throat, pinning him against the wall. What happened next was not a killing. It was a statement. When it was over, Victor turned to Arya. Blood spattered his white shirt, his eyes typically ice-cold, burned with something between rage and possessive protection. Are you hurt? He demanded. Arya straightened her dress. No. The drive back to the estate was silent, tense, electricity crackling between them like a storm about to break. Victor's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, processing, controlling. Arya watched him. For the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who would burn the world to keep her safe, who had just transformed from her captor to something else entirely, something dangerous, something hers. The estate's massive doors closed with a whisper of expensive hinges, muffling the outside world. Victor stood at the sink, water running scalding hot, scrubbing at the blood coating his hands. Dark crimson swirled down the drain, but he couldn't wash away the stain beneath his skin. Arya watched him from the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the dim hallway light. She'd seen him kill tonight. Not just kill, demolish. 3 men who'd dared to corner her, who'd thought her vulnerable. Victor had turned them into nothing more than meat and memory. You're going to scrub your skin raw, she said quietly. He didn't look up, didn't stop scrubbing. Go to bed, Arya. But Arya didn't move. She'd spent her entire life being told where to go, what to do. Not anymore. Not with him. She crossed the marble floor, her bare feet silent. When she reached him, she placed her hand over his, stopping the frantic motion. The water kept running, steam rising between them. "Look at me!" she commanded. Something in her voice made Victor pause. Slowly, he raised his eyes. Blood still spattered his neck, his forearms. His knuckles were split and swollen from the violence. "I'm not afraid of you," Arya said, each word precise, deliberate. "Not of what you did, not of who you are." Victor's jaw clenched, a muscle jumped beneath his eye. "You should be." "I know exactly who you are," she continued. "A man who protects what's his. A man who destroys anything that threatens what he loves." The word love hung between them. Unexpected, raw, dangerous. Victor moved so fast, Arya didn't see it coming. One moment she was standing, the next she was pressed against the marble countertop, Victor's body a wall of muscle and barely contained fury behind her. His breath was hot against her neck. "I am not a good man," he growled. Russian rolled beneath the words, rough and unforgiving. "No," Arya agreed. "You're a dangerous man. There's a difference." Something broke inside him then. His mouth found hers, not gentle, not soft. This was claiming, possessive, the kiss of a man who'd carved a path of destruction and found something worth preserving. Arya met him with equal intensity. Her hands gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer. She tasted blood and violence and something underneath, a desperate hunger for connection. When they broke apart, Victor was breathing hard. "You deserve better than a monster's love." Arya's laugh was soft, dangerous. "Maybe I don't want better. Maybe I want you." Her phone rang. The moment shattered. Victor's face went pale as he saw the caller ID. His entire body went rigid, a predator sensing a threat. "What?" he demanded, answering. Arya watched his expression transform, from passion to pure, cold rage. "Repeat that," Victor said, each word like a blade. When he looked at her, the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. "Sophia's been taken. Her sister, 16 years old, taken by Dmitri." The message was clear. Surrender Arya, surrender his position, or Sophia dies. But Victor wasn't looking at her like a man contemplating surrender. He looked like a man about to burn the entire world to the ground. "We're going to get her back," Arya said. Not a question, a promise. Outside, a storm was building. Lightning cracked the sky, nature mirroring the violence brewing inside Viktor Volkov's soul. The night was just beginning, and someone was going to pay. The phone shattered against the concrete wall, fragments scattering like broken promises. Victor's breath came in ragged, controlled bursts, the kind that preceded absolute destruction. The video played again in his mind. Sofia Castellano, barely 16, her dark eyes wide with terror. Dimitri's sneering face just off camera. A simple message: surrender everything or watch the girl suffer. Arya stood frozen by the doorway, her skin pale as marble, hands trembling. "We'll get her back," she whispered, more to herself than to Victor. Victor turned, his scarred face a map of contained rage. "Not we. Me." The words sliced through the room like a blade. He knew what Dmitri really wanted, not just Sophia, but the documents. The evidence of his systematic dismantling of the Bratva's most profitable and brutal operations. For years, he'd been cutting out the cancer from within, shutting down trafficking routes, eliminating predators disguised as businessmen, creating clinics, redirecting money streams, all without his uncle realizing the full scope of his betrayal. Arya moved into Victor's study, her fingers trailing over meticulously organized files, spreadsheets, intelligence reports, rescue mission documentation. She realized suddenly that this wasn't a recent plan. Victor had been engineering this transformation for years, long before she entered his life. Her fingers found a folder marked Rehabilitation Programs. Inside were detailed plans for helping trafficking victims, medical care, legal support, job training. This wasn't just business, this was personal. This was revenge wrapped in redemption. "How long?" she asked softly. Victor didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Since my sister died." 5 words that carried an entire ocean of pain. The night stretched endless. Victor made calls in rapid Russian, his network of informants and soldiers moving like a complex, deadly machine. Alexei, his most trusted lieutenant, would coordinate ground teams. Financial traces would be followed. Every resource would be deployed. Arya watched him work, seeing something she'd never noticed before. Not just a killer, not just a monster, but a man determined to create something better from the wreckage of his own trauma. By 3 a.m., something shifted in her. The passive captive was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood power and sacrifice. While Victor reviewed satellite imagery, mapping potential extraction routes, Arya slipped into the medical supply cabinet. Her hands were steady as she measured sedatives, precise, calculated. She wrote the letter slowly, each word a goodbye, each sentence a promise and a plea for understanding. She knew what she was about to do would either save her sister or destroy everything. When she returned to Victor, her movements were soft, deliberate. She poured his favorite bourbon, the expensive Russian standard he allowed himself after difficult operations. Her fingers didn't shake as she slipped the sedatives in, watching them dissolve silently. Victor didn't notice. Too focused, too driven. She kissed him softly when he finally collapsed. Not a lover's kiss, a warrior's farewell. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I'm bringing my sister home." Her phone was already dialing. Dimitri's men would be expecting her call, a trade. Herself for Sofia, the perfect leverage. She walked out, leaving behind the most dangerous man she'd ever known. Leaving behind her protection, her future, everything, for family. The night swallowed her whole, filled with the promise of a confrontation that would change everything. The first gray light of dawn crept across the leather seats as Arya watched Dimitri's compound shrink in the rearview mirror. Tears traced silent paths down her cheeks, not from fear, but from a cold, calculated resolve. Sofia would be safe, no matter the cost. The car's engine hummed, a steady rhythm matching her racing heartbeat. She'd memorized every detail of her plan, every potential weakness in Dimitri's defenses. Victor would be awake by now, discovering her absence. His rage would be biblical. Dimitri's compound materialized, a fortress of stone and steel nestled in the Russian countryside. Guards moved like shadows, assault rifles held casually, but precisely. Arya knew each movement, each potential line of sight. She'd studied more than her father's ledgers. She'd studied survival. The car door opened. A meaty hand grabbed her arm, pulling her into the main building. The interior was all polished marble and dark wood, expensive art hiding the brutal business conducted within these walls. Dimitri waited in a study that looked more like a museum than an office. "Castellanos damaged goods," he said without preamble, looking her up and down. "Your father sells you like a broken toy." Arya met his gaze without flinching. "I'm here to negotiate." Dimitri laughed, a harsh sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Negotiate what? You're worthless, infertile, no strategic value." "I have documentation," Arya said coolly. "Complete records of every Bratva operation, financial trails, trafficking routes, names. If anything happens to me or Sofia, everything goes to federal authorities." The temperature in the room dropped. Dimitri's smile disappeared. "You think you can threaten me?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "I don't threaten, I promise." Meanwhile, miles away, Victor was destroying everything in his path. The penthouse looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Furniture splintered, glass shattered. His lieutenants watched in terrified silence as he read Arya's letter, a goodbye that revealed her plan to trade herself for Sofia. "Find her," he growled. "Now." Back in Dimitri's study, negotiations continued. He circled Arya like a predator, reassessing. "What do you really want?" Victor to abandon his reforms, return the Bratva to its original structure. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Dimitri's eyes glittered. "And in exchange?" Sophia's freedom. Completely. No future claims. A long moment stretched between them. Dmitri was weighing not just her words, but her potential. He'd underestimated women before. Never again. You know about Natasha, he said suddenly. Victor's murdered sister. The wound that had transformed Victor from a man to a machine of revenge. Arya didn't flinch. I know Victor Mercy killed her after what the traffickers did. I know it broke something inside him forever. Dimitri's smile was pure malevolence. And now you want to save the world, reshape the criminal empire? I want to survive, Arya corrected. And I will, by any means necessary. He gestured, and guards moved to escort her. Not to a cell, to a suite. Luxurious, controlled, a golden cage. But Arya was already activating her next move, a burner phone. Encrypted messages to Italian families hungry for change. While Dmitri thought he was containing her, she was weaving a web that would reshape everything. The game had only just begun. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown contact. One word. Ready? Arya looked out the window, where dawn was breaking over Dimitri's compound. Her reflection showed not a victim, but a strategist, a survivor. Ready, she whispered. The warehouse smelled like metal and fear. Victor's hands were still wet with blood when he grabbed the lieutenant by his throat, slamming him against the concrete wall. 10 o'clock in the morning, and already 3 men were dead. How did she slip past? His voice was steel wrapped in ice. The lieutenant, Mikhail, wheezed. Boss, she... Victor's knife pressed against the man's jugular, not to kill. Not yet. Just to remind him what death felt like. Speak. Mikhail's eyes darted. Fear rolled off him in waves. The cameras, someone disabled them, had to be inside help. Meanwhile, 20 miles across the city, Arya was playing her own dangerous game. She sat in Dimitri's conference room, looking fragile but calculating. Her fingers traced the edge of a leather folder, sliding subtle suggestions across the table. Numbers, projections, the kind of financial strategy that made even hardened criminals pause. Your current model loses 17% potential revenue due to law enforcement heat, she said softly. Victor's proposed restructuring eliminates that risk entirely. The lieutenants exchanged glances. Doubt was a seed, and Arya knew exactly how to plant it. Back in the warehouse, Victor was unraveling. His lieutenants watched carefully. They'd seen this rage before, the same consuming fury that erupted when his sister died. The ghost was becoming something more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose. Dimitri's compound was a different battlefield. When he dragged Sophia into the room, Arya's heart stopped. Her baby sister, still so young, still so vulnerable. Their reunion was carefully orchestrated, a brief embrace. Sophia's eyes met Arya's. In that moment, a weapon slipped from Arya's sleeve into Sophia's hand. A tiny movement, a whispered plan. Be strong, Arya murmured. I'm coming for you. Dmitri watched, amused. He thought he was in control. He had no idea Arya was already dismantling his empire, piece by calculated piece. That evening, everything changed. Dmitri pulled out an old photograph. Victor's sister. Broken, destroyed by traffickers. And then he revealed the truth that would shatter everything. Victor himself had pulled the trigger. A mercy killing. The ultimate act of love in a world of brutality. He killed his own sister, Dmitri said, watching Arya's reaction. The great Viktor Volkov, he's nothing but a monster. But Arya saw deeper. She understood now. The trauma, the pain, the impossible choice Victor had made to end his sister's suffering. Her horror transformed, became something harder, something colder. While Dmitri thought he was breaking her, Arya was sending coded messages to her Italian contacts, to Victor's most loyal lieutenants. Each message a tiny explosive charge, ready to detonate Dimitri's entire power structure. Let him think she was crumbling. Let him believe he was winning. She was about to show him what a true strategist looked like. Her fingers traced a small communications device, hidden in the seam of her sleeve. A device that would broadcast everything, every conversation, every threat, to exactly the right people. Dmitri continued talking, believing he was wearing her down. You understand now, don't you? The world of men like Victor, men like me. There's no escape, no redemption. Arya's smile was razor thin. No, she whispered. There's always a way. Outside, the first shadows of her plan were already moving. Lieutenants were being contacted, alliances were shifting, and Victor, her brutal, beautiful monster, was hunting her with a fury that would remake entire criminal empires. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the architect of a revolution, and it was just beginning. The warehouse thrummed with a dangerous electricity. Arya stood at the center, her petite frame radiating a cold, calculated power that made Dmitri's men shift uncomfortably. Her fingers traced the edge of a manila folder, the weapon more deadly than any gun in this room. Gentlemen, she said, her voice low and controlled, let's discuss your future. Two of Dmitri's top lieutenants, Konstantin and Pavel, exchanged glances. They'd been ready to dismiss her as a girl, a worthless bride passed around like collateral. Now they saw something else entirely. The documents before them outlined a restructuring that would preserve their wealth while eliminating the most brutal aspects of their operations. No more children trafficked, no more women sold like cattle. A criminal empire with actual honor. Konstantin broke the silence. And what guarantee do we have? Before Arya could respond, the warehouse's steel doors exploded inward. Viktor Volkov entered like a storm, 6 feet 4 inches of pure, controlled violence. Blood spattered his tactical gear, evidence of the men he'd cut through to reach this moment. Their eyes locked. Arya didn't flinch. Viktor's tracker had led him here, but what he found was not a damsel in distress. She had already turned half of Dmitri's organization before he'd arrived. Surprise, she said dryly. Dmitri emerged from the shadows, his weathered face a map of old brutality. My dear nephew, always so dramatic. The room temperature dropped. 3 generations of criminal royalty, the aging patriarch, the ruthless enforcer, and the unexpected strategist faced each other. You're finished, uncle, Victor said. No emotion. Pure statement of fact. Dmitri laughed, a harsh sound that promised violence. You think you can reshape the Bratva? With her? He gestured dismissively at Arya. Not just me, Arya interjected. The Italian families are watching. They want change too. As if on cue, representatives from 2 prominent Italian crime families stepped from the shadows. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was a potential restructuring of entire criminal networks. Dmitri's confidence wavered. He'd expected to find a frightened girl, a bargaining chip. Instead, he faced a fully formed revolution. You're making a mistake, Dmitri warned, but his voice lacked conviction. Victor's hand rested near his weapon. The only mistake was thinking you could continue operating without consequences. Arya watched, tracking every subtle movement. She'd studied Victor's tactics, learned from his training. The room was a chessboard, and she was several moves ahead. Suddenly, Dmitri's demeanor changed. Gone was the calculating crime lord. Now, pure desperation took over. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Arya, pressing a gun against her temple. Nobody moves, he shouted. Victor went absolutely still, not out of fear, but like a predator calculating the precise moment to strike. You think this ends you? Dmitri's voice was slightly hysterical. You think you can just walk away? Arya didn't struggle. She looked directly at Victor, a silent communication passing between them. Her eyes said, I trust you. Do what needs to be done. The warehouse grew silent. Dmitri's lieutenants had already mentally chosen sides. Pavel and Konstantin stood slightly away from their old boss, waiting. Let her go, Victor said. Not a request, a promise. Dmitri started dragging Arya toward an exit, his grip tight. But something in his movement was wrong, desperate. He knew he'd already lost. Outside the warehouse, explosives were rigged. Dmitri's final play. If he couldn't win, no one would. Innocents would die, families would be destroyed. Victor had a choice: pursue his uncle and potentially lose those hostages or ensure their safety. The monster or the man, the revenge or the rescue. Arya's voice cut through the tension. Soft, certain. Your move. The warehouse echoed with gunfire and the metallic tang of blood. Dimitri's fingers dug into Arya's arm. The gun pressed against her temple, a stark reminder of how close she was to death. But her training with Victor had transformed her from a trembling captive into something far more dangerous. Your boyfriend's too busy playing hero, Dimitri sneered, dragging her through a maze of concrete corridors. Explosives lined the walls. Victor's men were systematically disarming them, creating controlled chaos. Each step Dimitri took was heavy with rage and desperation. Arya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. Victor had taught her more than just combat moves. He'd taught her strategy. She tracked the slight shifts in Dimitri's grip, the subtle tension in his muscles, waiting, calculating. The moment came faster than Dimitri expected. As he turned to bark orders to a nearby lieutenant, Arya drove her elbow backward with precision, catching him in the solar plexus. The gun wavered. Her heel crashed into his instep, another move Victor had drilled into her during endless training sessions. Dimitri stumbled. For a heartbeat, he was vulnerable. Arya didn't hesitate. She grabbed a nearby metal pipe, spinning with a grace that would have shocked her former self. The pipe connected with Dimitri's wrist. The gun clattered to the ground. You think you're something special? Dimitri recovered quickly, lunging at her. You're nothing, a barren girl playing at being dangerous. Her laugh was cold. I learned from the best. Their fight was brutal and personal. Arya used everything Victor had taught her. Environmental weapons, quick strikes, always moving. She wasn't fighting like a victim anymore. She was fighting like a predator. Across the warehouse, Victor was engaged in his own brutal dance with Dimitri's top lieutenants. Blood streaked his face, his movements a controlled hurricane of violence. But his eyes never fully left Arya. Dimitri's next words were calculated to break her. Just like I did to Victor's sister Natasha, he spat. He never finished the sentence. Victor's roar of pure, murderous rage cut through the warehouse noise like a knife. The remaining fighters froze. But it was Arya who stepped between Victor and Dimitri. Her hand on Victor's chest wasn't submission. It was control. Not like this, she whispered. We end this differently. Victor's breathing was ragged, his hands clenched into fists that could crush bone. For a moment, the entire warehouse held its collective breath. Then Arya did something unexpected. She looked Dimitri in the eye. A quick death. That's all you deserve. Victor's knife moved so fast it was almost invisible. One precise strike. Dimitri collapsed, death coming faster than he could comprehend. Silence descended. Bodies littered the concrete floor. Smoke drifted from spent ammunition. Dawn's first light crept through broken windows, painting everything in soft grays and reds. Victor pulled Arya close. She was shaking, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. Her hands, still gripping the metal pipe, were steady. You came for me, she whispered. His response was a promise carved in blood and bone. I will always come for you. Outside, Sophia was safe. The Bratva was changing, and something new, something dangerous and beautiful, was being born. Arya looked up at Victor, seeing not a monster, but the man who had saved her. The man she had, in turn, saved. Their reflection in a shattered warehouse window showed two survivors, two warriors, two halves of something unbreakable. The massive oak doors of the traditional meeting hall creaked open, and a hush fell over the assembled Bratva leadership. Viktor Volkov walked in, 6 feet, 4 inches of pure, controlled violence. But what truly shocked the old guard wasn't Victor. It was the woman standing beside him. Arya met their stares without flinching. Her emerald green dress was tailored like armor, her posture straight and unyielding. No one missed the folder of documents clutched in her hand or the way Victor's hand rested possessively at the small of her back. Brothers, Victor's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Today, we discuss the future of our organization. An elder near the back, Yuri Petrov, one of Dimitri's oldest lieutenants, stood abruptly. A woman? In our sacred meeting? And not just any woman, but this infertile outsider? Before anyone could react, Arya stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate. She opened the folder and spread documents across the central table. "Signed agreements," she said coolly, "from the Moretti family in Chicago, the Romano Syndicate in New York, and the Esposito organization in Miami. 3 major Italian crime families agreeing to support Victor's leadership, contingent on specific reforms." The room went dead silent. Victor's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "My strategist will now outline our new operational protocols," Yuri sputtered. "Strategist? A woman cannot." In one fluid motion, Victor's lieutenant Alexei drew his weapon and pressed it against Yuri's temple. "She speaks. You listen." Arya's voice was calm, clinical. "We're eliminating human trafficking operations. Our financial models show we can increase profits by 37% through cybercrime, strategic investments, and targeted corporate infiltration. No more flesh trade, no more children." The younger members, those under 40, leaned forward, suddenly interested. The old guard looked like they'd been slapped. "You cannot just—" another elder began. Victor moved so fast most didn't see it. A knife appeared in his hand, pinning the elder's sleeve to the table. "I can. And I will." The tension was electric. Arya noticed her father, Lorenzo Castellano, sitting in the back. Their eyes met. He looked pale, defeated. She knew he had tried to poison her, a final insurance policy when he'd traded her to Victor, but she'd survived. More than survived. "Those who resist," Arya continued, her tone steel wrapped in silk, "will find themselves cut off from our new financial networks. No banking, no investments, no protection." The younger Bratva members began nodding. They were tired of the old ways, the constant violence, the reputation that made them pariahs. Victor stepped forward. "I am now your leader, not through violence, through vision." Alexei moved, blocking the exits. A clear message. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a declaration. One by one, the old guard realized they had a choice: adapt or disappear. Some looked defeated, some looked terrified. But none moved against Victor or Arya. As the meeting concluded, Arya felt Victor's hand slide into hers. A signal, a promise. They had just rewritten the rules of an entire criminal empire. Her father caught her eye one more time. The message was clear. She was no longer the worthless, infertile daughter he could trade away. She was a queen. Their queen. The Bratva would never be the same. The warehouse was cold, silent, the kind of silence that meant someone was about to die. Arya stood perfectly still, her fingers wrapped around a manila folder containing her father's most damning secrets. Lorenzo Castellano knelt before her, chains binding his wrists, his once proud Mafia Don posture now reduced to a trembling, broken man. "You poisoned me," she said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Lorenzo's eyes darted nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The slow-acting toxin you administered when you handed me to Victor. Insurance. You never expected me to live this long." Her voice was clinical, detached. Years of watching her father's brutal negotiations had taught her exactly how to dismantle a man's defenses. The warehouse door opened. Victor entered like a storm, 6 feet 4 inches of pure, contained violence. His scarred hands flexed, and Lorenzo visibly flinched. "Tell her," Victor growled, "or I start removing body parts." Lorenzo broke. "It was a precaution, a specialized compound designed to systematically destroy your reproductive system. Given your existing MRKH condition, I knew it would ensure you remained worthless." Arya felt a strange calm. The dizzy spells, the unexplained fatigue, the mysterious weakness she'd been experiencing made sense now. Her father had ensured her destruction, even beyond her existing infertility. "The details," she demanded. "What's the progression?" Lorenzo's laugh was bitter. "Within days, the toxin will completely obliterate any potential for future reproduction. Even advanced medical interventions won't help. You'll be utterly barren." Victor's rage was a living thing. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You tried to kill my wife." She was never worth anything, Lorenzo spat. No children, no value. In one fluid motion, Victor grabbed Lorenzo by the throat, but Arya's hand on his arm stopped him. Not yet. I want the antidote details first. The negotiation that followed was brutal and precise. Lorenzo revealed everything: the compound's origin, potential treatments, side effects. But each option came with a devastating cost: total reproductive destruction. The only viable treatment, Lorenzo explained, requires aggressive medical intervention that will permanently eliminate any chance of future fertility. Even theoretical medical advancements won't restore your reproductive capacity. Victor's response was immediate. I choose her life. Always. But Arya wasn't finished. She stepped closer to Victor, her eyes blazing with an unexpected fire. I want something first. A real marriage. Not a Bratva arrangement. A legal marriage. If I'm going to be permanently barren, I want to be yours. Completely. The warehouse went absolutely silent. Victor stared at her, something profound and dangerous shifting in his eyes. The monster who collected debts and blood was being transformed by love, a love no one, least of all Lorenzo, had believed possible. You want to marry me? Victor said slowly, knowing exactly who and what I am. I want to be yours forever, Arya responded. With or without a womb. With or without children. I choose you. Lorenzo watched, comprehending for the first time that he had dramatically underestimated his daughter. The girl he'd considered worthless had just negotiated her own salvation, standing toe-to-toe with the most feared enforcer in the Russian Bratva. Victor's response was a kiss that was part claim, part promise, brutal, possessive, transformative. Then let's go get married, he whispered against her lips, and then we'll handle your father. Outside the warehouse, the first hints of dawn were breaking, a new day, a new order, written in blood and unexpected love. The chapel glowed softly in the evening light, candles casting shadows across stone walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets. Victor stood motionless, his massive frame dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that spoke of both refined control and barely contained violence. His scarred hands trembled almost imperceptibly as Sophia arranged Arya's veil. Arya's white dress was simple, but elegant, no princess gown, but something that reflected her strength. She wasn't a woman to be decorated, but one who would stand beside her husband as an equal. Her eyes met Victor's, and the entire room seemed to disappear. Alexei served as their witness, his stance military precise near the ornate wooden doors. Sophia watched with a mix of hope and wariness, understanding more about survival and transformation than any 16-year-old should. Their vows weren't traditional. Victor's voice was rough, each word sounding like it was torn from somewhere deep and painful. You are not a possession. You are not a weakness. You are the reason I will remake everything I've destroyed. Arya's response was equally raw. I choose you, not because I have no other choice, but because you are the only man worthy of choosing. The kiss that followed wasn't sweet or gentle. It was a claiming, a promise written in passion and potential violence. When they pulled apart, Alexei cleared his throat. The Bratva Council awaits your announcement. Their wedding night was a hurricane of desperate passion. Victor moved over her like a man who understood he might lose everything at any moment. His hands traced her body as though memorizing every curve, every plane, every potential weakness. And Arya met him with equal intensity, her fingers leaving marks on his scarred back, her legs wrapped around him like a promise. I'm terrified, Victor whispered against her neck, the first true vulnerability she'd ever heard from him. The treatment tomorrow could, she silenced him with a kiss. We survive, that's what we do. Morning came too quickly. The medical facility was discreet, tucked away in the Swiss Alps where privacy was guaranteed and questions weren't asked. Victor never left her side. His massive frame incongruously gentle as nurses prepared Arya for the complex treatment that might save her life. The first days were brutal. Arya burned with fever, her body fighting the aggressive medical intervention. Victor read to her in Russian, his deep voice a constant in the fog of pain and medication. Sometimes historical texts about Russian warfare, sometimes children's stories he half remembered from before violence consumed his world. "You'll survive," he would murmur, "because you are the most dangerous creature I've ever met." On the third day, her fever broke. Victor had fallen asleep holding her hand, his face showing the raw edges of fear he normally kept so carefully hidden. Scars traced his cheeks, testament to years of violence, but now they looked vulnerable in the soft hospital light. When Arya's fingers twitched in his, he was instantly awake. No gradual awakening, pure predator reflexes honed by years in the Bratva's most dangerous circles. But when he saw her eyes, something inside him shattered and rebuilt itself. "Privyet," she whispered. "Hello." His laugh was both a sob and a victory cry. Outside the medical facility's windows, the Swiss mountains stood silent, witnesses to another transformation, another survival against impossible odds. The Bratva would never be the same. Victor and Arya would ensure that. Their story was just beginning. Chapter 22: Unexpected Gifts. The conference room fell silent as Arya finished her presentation. Her fingers traced the holographic financial projections, each movement precise and calculated. The Italian family representatives exchanged glances, a mixture of respect and barely concealed shock etched across their faces. Victor stood at the far end of the room, a mountain of muscle and controlled violence, watching her with a pride that radiated through the space. Gone were the days when women were mere decorations in these meetings. Arya wasn't just present, she was commanding. "The restructuring of our international logistics network will increase profit margins by 37% while reducing operational risks," she said, her voice steady. No tremor, no hint of the woman who had once been terrified of her own shadow. The Bratva leadership, men who had once laughed at the idea of a woman in their inner circle, now listened with rapt attention. When the meeting concluded, Victor approached her, his massive frame casting a shadow over her smaller form. But there was no threat in his presence, only protection. His hand brushed her lower back, a possessive gesture that spoke volumes about their partnership. "Impressive," he murmured in Russian, the language still foreign but familiar on her tongue. Later that evening, in their penthouse overlooking the city, Arya felt strange. A wave of nausea rolled through her, unexpected and sharp. Victor noticed immediately. He always noticed. "You're not well," he stated, more observation than question. She tried to wave it off. "Just tired. The meeting was—" Another wave of nausea interrupted her. Victor's hand was already on her forehead, checking her temperature with a gentleness that would shock anyone who knew his reputation. "We're going to the doctor," he declared. The medical clinic was private, owned discreetly by the Bratva. Dr. Mikhailov, a man who had treated Victor's wounds countless times, now studied Arya with professional detachment. Blood tests, ultrasound, a series of examinations that felt both routine and extraordinary. When Dr. Mikhailov returned, his typically neutral expression was replaced by something Arya had never seen before: genuine surprise. "The aggressive treatment you underwent, the one designed to save your life after the poisoning, it appears to have had an unexpected effect," he said carefully. Victor leaned forward, tension coiling through his massive frame. "Explain." "Your wife is pregnant," Dr. Mikhailov said simply. The room went perfectly, absolutely still. Arya felt the world tilt. Pregnant. Her. The woman who had been told her entire life she was worthless because she couldn't bear children. The woman who had a medical condition that supposedly made motherhood impossible. Victor's reaction wasn't joy, it was pure, raw terror. "I don't know how to be a father," he whispered, the first time she had ever heard vulnerability crack his voice. "I only know how to be a monster." Arya reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. The man who had killed without hesitation, who had transformed entire criminal systems, now looked utterly terrified by the prospect of fatherhood. "Then we'll learn together," she said softly. "We'll raise beautiful monsters." Outside their private world, the Bratva was changing. Former trafficking victims now ran charity clinics. Sophia was safe in university, healing. And here, in this moment, a new life grew. Unexpected, unplanned, but deeply loved. A child conceived not through traditional mafia calculations, but through something far more powerful. True partnership, unexpected redemption, and a love that had transformed two broken people into something extraordinary. The study was dark, moonlight slicing through Venetian blinds and casting sharp shadows across Victor's rigid frame. He hadn't moved in hours. The ultrasound images spread before him like evidence of something both miraculous and terrifying. Arya found him at 2 a.m., her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. She knew better than to interrupt his silence, but something in the tension of his shoulders told her this wasn't just shock, this was fear. "I don't know how to be a father," he said without turning, his voice rough like broken glass. "I know how to kill. I know how to protect. But raise a child?" She moved closer, her hand resting on her 6-month pregnant belly. "You know how to protect those who can't protect themselves. That's what parenting is." Victor's laugh was bitter. "My father taught me protection meant breaking bones. Showing weakness meant death." He finally turned, and she saw the raw vulnerability he showed to no one else. Not his lieutenants, not his enemies, just her. He told her about his childhood then, about a father who believed pain was the only language worth speaking, about beatings that left scars deeper than the physical marks, about watching his mother's silent suffering, about his sister's destruction at the hands of traffickers. "I promised myself I would never bring a child into this world of darkness," he whispered. Arya didn't minimize his fears. She understood darkness intimately. "We'll teach our child that darkness exists, but it doesn't define you. That power isn't about hurting others, but protecting them." Before Victor could respond, the first explosion rocked the compound. Old enemies, remnants of Dimitri's network, had chosen this moment to strike. They knew Victor would be distracted, knew Arya was pregnant. What they didn't know was how fundamentally they had underestimated both of them. Arya was already moving, reaching for the hidden weapon beneath a decorative side table. Victor was a blur of motion, deadly and precise. The first wave of attackers didn't even make it past the study's threshold. 3 men burst through the door. Victor dispatched 2 with surgical efficiency. A knife to the throat, a precise gunshot that shattered a spinal column. The third turned toward Arya, thinking her vulnerable. Big mistake. She had been training with Victor for months. Pregnancy hadn't slowed her reflexes. If anything, it had made her more dangerous. Her first shot took the attacker in the knee, her second between the eyes. By the time Victor finished clearing the ground floor, Arya was standing amid fallen bodies, one hand on her belly, the other still gripping her weapon. "You didn't need rescuing," Victor said. "It wasn't a question." "I never did," Arya responded. Outside, dawn was breaking. Blood stained the marble floors. Bodies would need to be removed, statements crafted, retaliatory measures planned. But in this moment, they were simply 2 warriors who had found each other in a world of chaos. Victor approached, wiping blood from his hands. He knelt before Arya, pressed his scarred cheek against her belly where their child grew. "I am still afraid," he admitted. "Good," she said, stroking his hair. "Fear means you'll be vigilant, not perfect, but present." Their child would be born into strength, not weakness, not innocence, but something far more powerful. A legacy of survival, of choosing love in a world designed for violence. The Bratva had a new future, and it started right here, in this moment of blood and hope. The marble conference table gleamed like a battlefield, pristine and cold. Arya moved with calculated grace, her pregnant belly a weapon as much as any knife. 6 months of transformation had turned her from captive to queen, and every Bratva member assembled knew it. Victor stood slightly behind her, a mountain of muscle and barely contained violence. His hand rested protectively on her lower back, a silent warning to anyone who might challenge her presence. The old guard, men who remembered when women were traded like cattle, shifted uncomfortably. Mikhail Petrov, a 60-year-old lieutenant with razor-thin lips and eyes like chipped ice, cleared his throat. "A pregnant woman in council meetings? This is not tradition." Before Victor could move, Arya stepped forward. Her voice was silk over steel. "Tradition? You mean the tradition of trafficking children? Of running drugs through school playgrounds? We've rewritten those traditions. The room went silent. Petrov's hand twitched toward his weapon. Victor's movement was lightning. A knife materialized, pinning Petrov's hand to the polished wood. Blood bloomed around the blade, bright and visceral. But it was Arya who leaned close, her whisper cutting deeper than any weapon. "I'm not his weakness," she murmured into Petrov's ear. "I'm the reason he no longer needs to show mercy. Question me again, and you'll beg for the death he would have given you before he loved me." The other council members didn't move. They'd seen Victor's brutality, but this calculated destruction, was something new. This was Arya's power. When they returned home, the penthouse that had once been her gilded cage now felt like a fortress of their own making. Victor's hands, capable of such violence moments ago, now touched her belly with impossible tenderness. "Moi malenki," he whispered in Russian. "My little one. I will protect you always." Arya watched him, seeing the monster and the man intertwined. The man who had kidnapped her, who had killed without hesitation, now spoke softly to their unborn child in a language of love. "We'll raise beautiful monsters together," she said, echoing the promise they'd made months ago. The city sprawled beneath their windows, a landscape they now controlled, not through blind violence but through strategic precision. Cybercrime networks hummed where trafficking rings once operated. Intelligence replaced brutality. Their empire grew not through fear, but through a calculated reshaping of power. Later that evening, as moonlight painted shadows across the floor, Victor knelt before her. His scarred hands pressed against her belly, rough palms seeking connection. When the baby kicked, a sudden, sharp movement, Victor's breath caught. A sound escaped him, not a sob, not quite a laugh, something raw and vulnerable that shattered the last remnant of the monster he believed himself to be. Tears tracked down his cheeks. The man who had been called the ghost for his merciless executions now wept against her stomach, feeling life pulse beneath his hands. Arya's fingers traced his scars, each one a map of his transformation. From enforcer to protector, from killer to father, from a man who believed love was impossible to a man who would burn the world to keep his family safe. "Ti moje serce," she whispered. "You are my heart." The baby kicked again. A promise. A future. Their beautiful, dangerous legacy beginning. Outside, the city moved. Criminal empires shifted. But here, in this moment, there was only Victor. Only Arya. Only the life growing between them. A testament that even in the darkest worlds, love could remake everything.